This idea that Democrats constantly need to appeal to people who don't like them. Donald Trump ain't down to go on Breakfast Club, so like, what are we talking about, right?
I know a lot of liberal outlets have been coming out saying, we stand with the AP. I don't think they do stand with the AP, because if you actually were to stand with the AP, they should all boycott the White House briefing.
I underestimated the level of power that Elon Musk would have.
President Musk.
I'm sorry, yes, you're right. Let me call him by his proper title.
The shadow president of the United States, Elon Musk, is saying, lock up journalists from CBS.
I don't know if you guys know this, but the ESPN has a multi-billion-dollar contract with the NFL. So by me saying that, I messed up the church's money.
The job of a journalist, when someone says it's raining outside and another person says it's not raining outside, your job is not to say, Mr. X says it's raining, Mr. Y says it's not raining.
You're not a stenographer.
Your job is to open the window and check if it's fucking raining outside.
So corporate journalism is here to stay. And because these corporations are at the mercy of shareholders who make no secret of what their political beliefs are, their influence then begins to influence the coverage of the news.
People are rolling over in advance, especially in the corporate world, just to kind of appease an administration that might come after them in some shape or form. And it's so cowardly and so dangerous.
What's the adage that people say? What's the point of having fuck you money if you never say fuck you?
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Mehdi Hassan.
I'm Jemele Hill.
And we're not kidding. And it's a live taping. I love live tapings. I love an audience. I love all of you already. I can tell from your faces. Before we've even got to the audience Q&A, Jemele, I can tell these are good people.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here at the On Air Fest. It is the Coachella of podcast festivals. That's what I'm told. That's what I was told. So I'm looking forward to everything that comes after. Jemele Hill is here. Give it up for Jemele. Fantastic host of Spolitics podcast, contributor at The Atlantic, an expert on many things, as we're going to discover tonight.
Master of none, though.
Oh, same. That's exactly how I feel. Exactly how I feel. What podcast do you listen to when you're not listening to your own, or this one, obviously?
Yeah, because I was going to say, does this one also count? I have to say, I'm pretty obsessed with the Dateline and Forensic Files podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. But beyond all that, more of a like original type of podcast. Listen to Native Land Pod, another iHeart favorite. All of my, the podcasts of my friends, very important for me to support those. Another iHeart favorite, which would be Naked with Carrie Champion. She is not naked. It is just called Naked. And both of which who are up for NAACP Image Awards. I believe Native Land Pod actually won in their category. Carrie is also up for one. So listen to a lot of my friends on iHeart, as well as, sort of discovering some other ones. I sort of flip around.
I mean, this is now the era of podcasts. As you know, apparently we can't have another presidential election unless it's podcast-led. Right? The number of discussions we have had in this country about did podcasts win it? Should Kamala Harris have gone on Joe Rogan? What is your take? Let's just cut straight to it.
Yeah.
Should Kamala Harris have gone on Joe Rogan? It's like
factor.
the biggest question of the U.S. presidential election campaign.
I think it says more the fact that people actually consider that to be a deciding factor about whether or not...
Good point.
Yeah, whether or not she went on this podcast. If that's what you were hinging your vote on, then frankly, I'm scared. I'm even more scared than I already am, because it shouldn't have been about that. Nevertheless, though, people act like when you go into these spaces, especially spaces that you expect to be hostile, that there's going to be something accomplished, right? The expectation is like, oh, if she just did more Fox, or if she just did, other sort of opposing view type of podcast, then she'll be able to sway this particular person to vote for her. And I don't think it works that way. I mean, I think a lot of the people who are dug in politically, especially now in this time, are dug in. Yeah. And this idea that Democrats constantly need to appeal to people who don't like them is really frustrating as a
never hear the reverse.
You never do.
You never hear the reverse.
Like, listen, Donald Trump ain't down to go on Breakfast Club. So, like, what are we talking about, right? It's just like it's never reciprocated.
Yes.
So
It's always the New York Times saying we need to send a reporter to another diner in a rural county.
Correct. I was like,
it's never the other way around.
My God.
I am still waiting for the Fox News package about where are Hillary Clinton voters and what do they think? Like, we never had it. It just never happened in reverse.
That way.
But we are. Oh, that leads us nicely into setting up the conversation today. We are over a month now officially into this shit show of a second Trump term.
We are firmly in the clown car.
4 weeks, 30 days. It feels like 4 years, 30 months, whatever it is. It really is PTSD. What has stood out to you most apart from, for me, it's the general sense of chaos, which we kind of expected, but they've even outdone our expectations.
Yeah.
Fired the guys who were watching the nuclear weapons and then went to try and rehire them. What has stood out to you in this first crazy period?
I have to be honest, like as much as I was aware of the news and just like you sort of feeling like I was deeply entrenched, I underestimated the level of power that Elon Musk would have. I knew he was
President Musk.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Let me call him by his proper title. I didn't realize that I knew that he would have a substantial role in terms of influence, in terms of being in Donald Trump's ear. But even with them saying, they were going to create Doge, and look how quick they got rid of Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, he was the DEI hire.
Yeah. Little did he know, right?
Little did he know. He got DEI'd out.
He got DEI'd on out of there. But I underestimated what that level of power would actually look like. I thought it'd be more sort of...
in the shadows, like traditional billionaires in the background.
But he's a real-life Littlefinger. Like, he really is.
He's leading press conferences in the Oval Office while his kid tells the president to shut up.
Exactly. I mean, if I'm his kid, I would feel empowered to do that given what's going on, right? So I totally...
Well, he's the only child that we know of that Musk seems to talk to alike. So.
Yeah, because the rest of his kids can't stand him, which is very telling. So I underestimated what that power would actually look like. And to me, he got the biggest bargain ever. I mean, he was able to buy a presidency for, the $250 million. If you want to count the $40 billion he played for Twitter.
I mean, he paid $40 billion for Twitter,
right? But
$250 million for the U.S. government.
I know.
That's pretty good pricing.
The government is pretty cheap, huh?
Pretty cheap.
Despite all the alleged fraud and abuse that's everywhere. So I mean, that was the part that was
interesting about what things you've already touched on in this opening few minutes is Musk and Rogan, podcasts, Trump. A lot of the through line to all this is a bunch of mainly men saying we want to be able to say whatever we want to say, free speech, we've been censored. JD Vance just the other day was going on about like you shouldn't hate yourself if you have a beer and
it's like having a beer with friends as if that's our problem.
But that's just great straw man argument as we would say. But this is the running like all I've heard about for years, as you have I'm sure, is the kind of free speech, stop suppressing us, stop censoring us, let us say our piece, DEI, blah blah blah, critical race theory, all that stuff. And I just think to myself, we now have these people in power, and we saw them in power last time, and they don't give a shit about free speech.
No.
In fact, the very opposite.
It is very much the opposite. And what always, whenever I've heard people say that about like, oh, free speech and cancel culture and all this, what is it that you want to say that's so damn revolutionary? Usually it's nothing. You have nothing. Like typically what they resent is the accountability. That's what this is all about. Like they don't.
Well, Musk, for example, wants to call people the R word. He does it a lot these days.
Yes, he does.
And Ron Filipkowski, who's a guy on Twitter who is ex-Republican who just kind of follows Republicans around, he actually did like some kind of like impromptu study of Musk's Twitter. He made a point that Musk never said that word until like last year. So it's clearly like I need to ingratiate myself with my new MAGA base, and this is a word that people feel needs to be said.
But I don't know if people ever sit back and watch this and say like it's just stupid. Like it's just very middle school. I was like, so
middle school is insulting to middle schoolers.
That is very fair.
As the father of a middle schooler,
very fair.
We are way into early elementary school, kindergarten.
But even toddlers, like this just very much feels like I want to be able to have the right to insult people and to offend people in a way that never holds me accountable for what I say. And I'm just like, that's not real life. And so I didn't know that being manly was defined by the worst things I could say about somebody. Because what JD Vance was talking about when he's in Germany is about like how men aren't allowed to have beer with friends. I was like, what is he talking about?
What country do you live in?
Like, I don't know what's going on in your house, but like, I don't care about those things. So all the things that they want to define what masculinity is supposed to mean, really, a lot of men should be insulted by that because they're basically saying what defines masculinity is the worst parts of yourself or the worst parts of being a man or your worst instincts.
RFK is the health secretary and Pete Hegseth is the defense secretary. So yes, they are saying the worst parts of your masculinity define you because we're going to put you in the cabinet. And we're recording this on the day that Kash Patel is now the FBI director, voted in 51 to 49 for a guy who was selling pills that would reverse the vax, wrote a children's book about Trump. And not that funny, said, I'm going to come after the media. I'm going to come after the media criminally or civilly.
Free speech, right?
Free speech.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's so great to be with you to have this conversation because for several years, you were part of a list that I would throw at people. When people said, free speech, conservatives, MAGA wants free speech, liberals over here. And I would have to remind people, do you remember the first Trump term? And the first Trump term involved You were part of that first Trump term, and I think we've got a clip. We're going to play the clip.
And you talked about the president being very clear after Charlottesville and denouncing all hate. I just wanted to read a comment from a influential African-American sportscaster from ESPN yesterday who said, Donald Trump is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. His rise is a direct result of white supremacy, period. He's unqualified and fit to be president. Why do you think, do you have a reaction to that? Is the president aware of that comment? And
I'm not sure if he's aware, but I think that's one of the more outrageous comments that anyone could make, and certainly something that I think is a fireable offense by ESPN.
First of all, suggesting that Donald Trump is a white supremacist is one of the more outrageous statements. Okay, that aged well as a comment over the years. You, of course, were the influential African-American broadcaster reference there.
That'd be me.
I couldn't believe my ears. The free speech warriors suggesting a journalist should be fired for saying what they want to say?
You know what I always find to be very amusing about that time in my life, and it was very little that was amusing. It's one of the most unoriginal things I've ever said. Like, I wish it were something that was a little more actually provocative, right? But now when you say Donald Trump's name and white supremacy, it's kind of like saying water is wet, right? So,
which is another one of Trump's great quotes, by the way. If anyone remembers, the most wet water we've had.
And so, like, at the time, I thought, in my mind, I thought everybody else knew that. So I didn't think I was breaking news, which is why I said it so plainly, because everybody's like, oh, did you know it would get this reaction? No, because I thought we had all agreed, and if you hadn't agreed, Charlottesville was
the clip we just played was just weeks after Charlottesville.
Was weeks after that,
in fact, there was a press conference where she was defending Trump's rhetoric from
about
Charlottesville.
Both sides being equal, and there was...
Which apparently is a hoax now, by the way. Elon Musk is we all imagine Trump said that stuff. And yet, in that same time, she said, you should be... So it is literally what the First Amendment was created for. This. Not for people to be able to say the R word or the N word, but for the government not to interfere in the media and tell people who can and can't be journalists based on the content of their journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people often get the First Amendment wrong. They don't understand that this is about protecting you from government retaliation, government pressure. And we are seeing, especially now in this time, and as we did then, but I think it's even worse now, a widespread violation of the First Amendment when you look at what the Associated Press is going through, because they're not referring to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. I was like, oh, so we're at that point where we could just lie about what we have. We all know that this is what the body of water actually is. And because they dare defy that, now all of a sudden they're banned for the White House. But that is exactly what the violation of First Amendment is. And in this democracy, in this whole experiment of democracy, people have to understand the integral part of democracy, it has to be a free press. Otherwise, this doesn't work. And that is something that Donald Trump, Elon Musk are very much trying to take away from what is our democratic society. And they're doing it in a way that's even more sophisticated than people realize, is that if they can convince you that there's widespread suppression of free speech, that there's widespread fraud, widespread waste, and they're the only ones who can solve all these problems, then you won't know who is stealing from the store, which is them.
Yes.
Right? And so everything they do is a projection of who they actually are. Every accusation is a projection. And we know Elon Musk, based off how he's run Twitter, I refuse to call it X, just
same.
So, based off what President Musk has determined should be in our information channels, like, we know that that's all a lie. Like, they want to suppress the speech that runs counter and that holds them accountable for what we know they're doing.
The Rupert Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal, not a leftist rag, is reporting this week that Twitter allegedly is calling up advertisers and corporations saying, you need to advertise with us or else. Which for me, again, surely that was what the First Amendment was designed for.
Like, but free market, right?
Free market, free speech.
Yeah.
Free speech as long as you advertise with us.
Yeah.
So this is the weird one. By the way, on the AP story, I've got to say, I don't know if you've seen a lot of liberal outlets have been coming out saying, we stand with the AP. And they've been putting out statements, the New York Times. This is outrageous. I don't think they do stand with the AP, because if you actually were to stand with the AP, they should all boycott the White House briefings.
Correct. I think they should all
say,
walk
if you're
out.
not going to have the AP, none of us are going to be there.
Yeah.
Not put out these mealy-mouthed, we stand with the AP, but let's carry on business as usual, as if you haven't just banned a media organization in this country, done a full Orban, Modi, Putin move. And it's very disappointing, to say the least, about quote-unquote liberal media.
And what's especially disappointing about that, for me, is somebody whose career started in newspapers, right? And as a journalist, as a print journalist, with that being the bulk of my background, we always had this, it was a principle we lived by, which is like you never let City Hall come after your reporters. Like that was the principle. Like when it came down to it, you protected the right for your reporters to report in a way that exercised the freedom of the press and that sort of thing. Even if you are with a right-wing leaning outlet, this is something that should terrify you. This is something that you shouldn't also stand for because this is about the freedom of the press. And it was especially disappointing to me that they didn't all walk out the press room. They should have all made a large statement, walked out as soon as the briefing started to send a message.
There's no solidarity, though.
But there's none because, unfortunately, for a lot of media outlets, they are intoxicated with the access.
Yes.
And it's like, that's never what journalism was supposed to be about. The whole crux of being a journalist is about disruption. It's about holding those in power accountable. It's an old phrase that I learned when I was in journalism school. I went to the mighty Michigan State University. And the phrase that we learned was our job was to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Yeah.
That is the root principle of being a journalist. And we don't do that anymore.
We haven't learned any lessons from the first term. I remember watching briefings in the first term, where I remember when Jim Acosta was manhandled for the microphone and he would insult Caitlin Collins, whoever it was. The way to have stopped Trump in his tracks then would have been for every journalist to say, I'm just going to ask the question from the person before me that you didn't answer.
That they didn't answer, correct.
Then get the damn answer rather than let him evade and duck and dodge, which is what he's done for nearly a decade. Just to go back to what happened in that first term, you have Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who, again, like so many, failed upwards. She's now the governor of an American state, God help us.
Yeah.
When she's saying that, what's going through your mind? What was your reaction at the time, I wonder?
So I have some friends that cover politics, and they were blowing my phone up like, oh my God, this was just said in the White House press briefing. And I was actually at work when that press briefing was taking place. And all of a sudden, I usually had my Twitter screen up to follow the news, the sports news of what was happening as I prepared for the show that day. And all of a sudden, it's just like a massive amount of tweets. I just kept, the mentions were exploding. And it got to a point where my account, it just froze up because it was so many mentions were happening. And so I tried to get back in it and I actually couldn't because it was getting bombarded to that scale. And I was just thinking, I was like, wow, this is very surreal. Like, of all the things that I would have thought happened, I never thought that what I said would have risen to the level that the White House would actually be asked about it or that they would comment in that fashion.
Do you think the fact that you're a black woman had something to do with it?
You think?
I don't know.
No.
Just wondering. I don't get a sense.
Well, he sort of between, me and Maxine Waters, it was a long list of black women that, he enjoyed insulting.
And has continued to in the intervening years.
Yeah.
Including the Vice President of the United States.
Including her as well. And so it was a club that I was actually proud to belong to because of the people in the club and because of what they stood for.
And ESPN didn't fire you in 2017 when they
not.
called for you, but the following year they did suspend you, I believe.
No, actually I got suspended a few weeks after that.
Okay.
So
this was the boycott, right? Was it the Jerry Jones?
It was because
Remind us what happened.
So a few weeks after this happened at the White House, I wasn't suspended then, and ESPN was very upset. And I will be very candid: the thing that saved me probably from suspension is the fact that a lot of prominent people, especially black athletes, came to my defense. Athletes I didn't even know. I mean, Kevin Durant is tweeting his support. LeBron, was in full support. And LeBron and I didn't know each other at all. Colin Kaepernick, who I met in passing, he also voiced his support. And ESPN is in the business of athletes. These are athletes that they want to talk to and engage with. And so seeing that they had my back, I think made them think twice. And not just them, but just a community of people as a whole, because for as many supporters as Donald Trump had, he certainly had a lot of detractors. Yeah. And they were getting, sort of that sense and that feedback. So that saved me that time. And then a couple weeks later, after Trump called NFL players sons of bitches because of the player protests, the NFL came out against Trump, quote unquote. They did this silly performative protest demonstration. I don't know what you want to call it, where they locked arms. It was like, what is this? This is a clown show. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, he said that if any player on the Cowboys dared to take a knee during the national anthem, engage in this kind of protest, that they would be cut immediately. Keep in mind at the time, this is
free speech.
Oh, but no, I mean, even if you want to go with the whole, well, the NFL's their employer, your employer's allowed to set certain standards. And keep in mind, there was no There was no rule that said that the players had to be on the field for the national anthem.
Yeah.
That rule did not exist, okay? There's a whole conversation we can have about how the military has influenced why that these players are out there, because they used to be in the locker room. That was never the case. And so a lot of fans who saw Jerry Jones and what he said, they were very upset, especially a lot of black fans, because the Cowboys have a significant black fan base. And so what I said on Twitter was that, the fans, they were saying like, well, how could you all play for somebody like that, and putting a lot of pressure on the players to wage a boycott or a protest of Jerry Jones. And I said, well, you just at home in the living room, you don't have to watch the NFL. No one's forcing you to. Why are you putting all the pressure on the players when you all are the ones that actually determine the behavior of these owners? Because it's your dollars and your interests that is funneling all of this. You see who the NFL sponsors are. If y'all are that upset about it, boycott them. All right? Don't watch the NFL. Like, if you're that upset,
People weren't happy with you.
They were not, because, I don't know if you guys know this, but the ESPN has a multi-billion-dollar contract with the NFL. So by me saying that, I messed up the church's money, right? And listen, I understood very much why ESPN decided to suspend me. As it was told to me at the time, their expectation after the Trump dust-up was that I was to be seen and not heard. And unfortunately, I was still being heard. And so they made the decision to suspend me. I wasn't tripping about it because, when you mess with advertisers, this was what's happened. But at the end of the day, I got to live with myself too. Yeah. So they did what they had to do. I did what I had to do. And there was a suspension. It was fine.
And of course, the White House love this stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. Because
even recently in the second term now, you've seen them obsessed with the media, picking fights on social media. Jim Acosta was kind of moved to a graveyard slot at CNN. Trump hates him. He quit CNN, went to Substack. Immediately, Trump put out a statement delightedly attacking Acosta. Like, they follow this stuff really closely. Like, they get into the weeds. People who should be running the government. And I had weird experience of that myself.
Did
very
you?
Recently.
I've heard about this. Something with you and JD Vance.
It was very strange.
It was, yes. What was the word that he called you?
I'm a dummy. I don't know whether to enjoy it or be offended by it, of all the insults.
I think you should enjoy it.
A friend of mine said to me, he clearly likes you secretly. No one calls. And I was like, I don't know if that's worse. I don't know if that's worse. Do I want to be liked by JD Vance?
So what happened?
I've seen how he sticks up for brown people. Look, all I said to JD Vance when he came back from, you saw that ridiculous German trip.
I did.
Where he goes and he lectures people in Europe on free speech, including British government is locking people up for what they said. At the same time, Elon Musk is saying imprison 60 Minutes journalists. This is what we've got to as a country. Not 4 months into the Trump presidency, 4 weeks in, the shadow president of the United States, Elon Musk, is saying lock up journalists from CBS. And I simply said very politely to JD Vance, what do you think of this? How does this go? Have you seen this? I also pointed out the AP story. He came back saying, and suddenly there I am on President's Day, holiday, with my kids, snow tubing, and I come off and I look at my phone exploding because he's come into my replies to go, you dummy, denying a reporter a seat in the briefing room is not the same as putting them in prison. That's a different, one's free speech violation, one's not. First of all, taking away AP's access is a free speech violation because you're doing it because you don't like the content of their reporting. It's a very clear violation of the First Amendment. Secondly, I didn't just raise the AP issue. He conveniently ignored Elon Musk calling for the because there's no defense of that, right? And this is the problem coming back to journalists. Like, how are they getting away with this shit, Jemele? How is it that JD Vance can come into my replies, because obviously he's not the vice president, he doesn't have anything to do with his time, that he has time to come into my replies, but on a Monday. But put aside his lack of things to do, how are they able to get away with this shit? Not just the double standards, hypocrisy on free speech, but that no one's even calling them out on it, right? Like, this is insane. We're back to that first term, flood the zone with bullshit, so much crap happening every day that we're all just moving on. Right, we all just, oh my God, what are we gonna? Since that happened, Trump has said, I'm the king. Like, we've already had 7 other comments since then.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a representation of the media journalists actually abdicating their responsibility. And, when I was starting off in my career, and then there was a lot of anxiety about what the future of journalism would look like, because you had a lot of newspapers who for a time enjoyed this huge profit margin. And then when that profit margin started to shrink, they had to get more creative with how they responded to that shrinkage. And what you have seen now is that, television outlets, media outlets, newspapers, they're no longer owned by families. They're no longer owned by private owners. These are people who are actually invested in journalism. They're owned by big corporations. It's a consolidation of the media that has happened.
Yes.
So corporate journalism is here to stay. And because these corporations are at the mercy of shareholders who make no secret of what their political beliefs are, that their influence then begins to influence the coverage of the news. And so when you have the largest shareholder at Warner Brothers, who is a very loud and proud Trump supporter, that begins to show up in the coverage, because it's not just enough for them to be a shareholder. They need to make sure that their views and how they feel about journalism is influenced in the coverage. And so for a lot of journalists, I think it has unfortunately trained this generation of journalists, and even to some degree it started with mine, it has trained them to hide behind objectivity and the cowardice of objectivity.
The view from nowhere.
Yeah, the both sidesism. See, here's the thing. The whole point of journalism is about telling the truth. If you can't call a thing, why are you a journalist?
Yes.
Right? And so you have a lot of people who will say, oh, I'm just being objective. No, your job is to be fair.
Yes.
Right? There's no two sides to racism. There's no two sides to white supremacy. Either it's white supremacy or it's not.
There's no two sides to up is down, black is white.
No,
we're
there's
talking
no
about objective reality.
Correct.
Which is, so Donald Trump said this week, my envoy went to Ukraine and Zelensky was sleeping. Very rude and didn't meet him. There's a fucking picture of Zelensky meeting his envoy. Like we're living in that weird world where Trump can just say, don't believe your lying eyes.
So there's no penalty for journalists anymore for being inaccurate, for not telling the truth, for this type of reporting. Look, I mean, I felt like there's been a lot of victories against what should be journalism, but I felt like for sure what may have been, I hate to say it, sort of the nail in the coffin, the fact that Fox News had to pay almost $1 billion for lying to their viewers about who won the presidential election, and they were still allowed to host a presidential debate. That's when I was just like, we've lost.
Yeah, there's no consequences.
There's no consequence.
And
we cannot come back from this.
But it also requires the rest of us to keep calling it out, right?
It
to
does.
stay safe. Some people say to me, well, what's the point? People, I've got friends and family like, what's the point of doing what you do? Like, Trump just got reelected. People believe this shit. And my point is, I don't care whether people believe it or not. My job is just to kind of stay sane and just say up is down, hot is cold. Don't fall into the trap and say up is down. There you go. I'm following. Black is white, hot is cold. Like, this is our job. You mentioned earlier, like the mantra from your J school was, comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable. One phrase that has always stuck with me about journalism is the job of a journalist when someone says it's raining outside and another person says it's not raining outside. Your job is not to say Mr. X says it's raining, Mr. Y says it's not raining.
You're not a stenographer.
Your job is to open the window and check if it's fucking raining outside, right? That is your job, and then state it as fact. So I think this is what we're forgetting. One thing I've got to talk about before we go to our audience, I do want to take some questions from our live audience here, but your worlds are all colliding right now, I feel like, right? Because you're a journalist. You mentioned just now corporate control. You've worked in corporate media, do work. And then, of course, sport, which is what you're best known for. We talk about the intersection between tech and politics. What about sport and politics? You have Donald Trump really weaponizing sport right now and the MAGA movement. We saw him turn up at the Super Bowl, first sitting president, I believe, to attend the Super Bowl. I didn't know until one of my producers told me that he's always wanted to own an NFL team since the 80s, and he was denied.
And to be honest, like, I sort of blame the NFL because we have to deal with Trump in this capacity, because had they just let him own a team, maybe he would not have made
Everything is like petty vengeance, right?
Exactly.
Bitterness.
Correct.
It's like if only Barack Obama hadn't made fun of him that night
right.
at the
We'd
White
all
House
be better
Correspondents'
off.
Dinner.
Like, Barack, keep the joke.
Yeah, so, but what is going on in the sports world? Because I saw Caroline Leavitt, the current White House press secretary, who hasn't yet called for either of us to be fired. She said recently that the White House is going to eliminate special tax breaks for sports team owners. Is that some kind of vengeance? Does Trump have an issue with the people who own sports teams? Because there's this weird statistic that, and correct me if you know more about this than I do, that a lot of the sports teams' owners were actually donors to the Democrats, with the exception of the NBA, but that's because Miriam Adelson skewed it all, the pro-Israel donor who owns a basketball team. So what is going on with Trump and some of these sports owners?
So it's actually kind of surprising because Jerry Jones, Stephen Ross, who owns the Miami Dolphins, these are big Trump supporters. I believe Shad Khan, who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars.
He contributed to the inauguration fund.
To the inauguration fund. So a lot of them have contributed to his funds. But there's this capitulation that happens. So part of the reason that Colin Kaepernick won his collusion lawsuit against the NFL, because there was very direct evidence of the fact that Donald Trump told Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, he told him that the protest was a winning issue for him and that they would be best to silence Colin Kaepernick and other players who protested because they were in fear of Trump targeting the NFL. So they decided that, you know what, Colin Kaepernick's got to be the sacrificial lamb. And so from that example, that is very much a carryover from that. Like, he still hasn't forgiven the fact that these owners, some of the same ones that donated to his inauguration committee, Bob Kraft for the Patriots. So that was another one who was, or at some point was, a close friend of Trump's. He hasn't forgotten the fact that after he called their players sons of bitches, that they all did their weak little demonstration, and he kind of hasn't forgiven him for that. But more importantly, what people need to understand about this go-round is that before the sports, there was a lot of opposition to Trump that first go-round. You had LeBron James calling Trump a bum. You had Steph Curry saying, hey, I ain't going to the White House.
And a lot of teams didn't show up at the White House.
A lot of teams
Golden
did
State
not.
Warriors, Philadelphia Eagles.
Yep, a lot of teams didn't go. But this time around, I think it's going to be different. I think
Capitulation?
there's a capitulation that's already there. Like, today, as we're recording this podcast, they're having the Black History Month celebration at the White House. Guess who's there? And loud and proud, Tiger Woods.
Okay.
Right?
I'm amazed they're even having a Black History Month celebration at the White House,
Yeah,
to be honest.
I mean, because I thought
How
that...
did DEI not get rid of that?
Sounds like I thought that was off the table. But nevertheless...
But the capitulation is clear. I mean, the
capitulation
NFL's
is
taken
clear.
off the end racism thing.
They claim the reason they did it is because of the wildfires that happened in Los Angeles, the tragic events in New Orleans. Like, they felt like they needed to acknowledge these other tragedies. But I'm like, so you do this, you do end racism. I mean, was racism over? Like, I don't know. But you do this when the first sitting president, who happens to be Donald Trump, is going to attend the Super Bowl. And by the way, I hope people look up how much that costs for the president to attend the Super Bowl.
How much do you think it cost for him to drive his car around the Daytona track? Where was Doge for that?
Oh, I think it was $10 million.
Where
for
was
just
Doge
that.
from the fuel and all that crap that
Yes,
they
since
do?
they're about
but
fraud
you
and
look at that,
waste.
the Daytona, but this is very strategic. I mean,
Yes.
look, they know what they're doing with the UFC.
His crowd. UFC is his crowd.
They want NFL to be their crowd.
They want, same thing with college football. Remember, before the college football playoff, you get this Donald Trump pop-up message like, what are we doing here? So you're going to see a lot more of that. And so this time around, I think when it comes to the White House and when it comes to the opposition, it won't be there. I expect the NBA and the WNBA to stay where they are. And by the way, he didn't invite a single women's team to the White House when he was there before. There was a women's team that went. That was Kim Mulkey, who took her team there, also a Trump supporter. And so, like, the people that support him are going to go to the White House.
I thought he was a champion of women's sport.
Oh,
I was
yes.
told he was a champion of women's sport.
That's
He
right,
went out
'cause
and
he said-
banned trans women from participating.
Yeah, and then
because he's a hero for feminists.
he wants to protect women's sport. And then at the same time, the same U.S. Department of Education also announced they were reversing some Joe Biden presidential guidance about how to distribute evenly NIL money between male and female athletes. They walked all that back. So Joe Biden told that schools, hey, you got to make sure that it's fair and equal. And Donald Trump, one of the first things that he did was reverse all of that. So while everybody is over here concerned about, I think it was NCAA President Charlie Baker, there is less than 10 trans athletes that are competing
out of 500,000, I think.
Out of 500,000. So they did all that energy over there when the real thing happening over here was them denying women the opportunity to get a piece of the same money as men's sports.
Jemele, they're getting away with it. Right?
Yes,
they're getting away with
they
it,
are.
as you say, compared to the first term, and the capitulation is full on. A lot of the stuff they're doing, like the NFL and racism, it's not legal. It's not like he has to pass an executive order or law. People are rolling over in advance, especially in the corporate world. They are doing Disney, and all these big corporates are doing things they don't need to do just to kind of appease, an administration that might come after them in some shape or form. And it's so cowardly and so dangerous.
What's the adage that people say? What's the point of having fuck you money if you never say fuck you?
Yes, so true.
You're right? And so all these people that are
Because they want
capitulating...
more fuck you money.
I'm
It's
just saying, you
endless.
already got fuck you money. Why are you obeying in advance? It doesn't make... You're Disney. Like, people got kids. Like, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop watching Disney.
Should that be the Democratic Party mantra going into the midterms? Use your fuck you money.
I mean, like, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, who just gave, like, basically a bribe...
We can start a whole new show about how much I loathe Mark Zuckerberg. Before we wrap up this, and I want to go to the audience, you know what really depresses me is you've got the 2026 FIFA World Cup in the United States, and you've got the Summer Olympics in LA in 2028. Both will be Donald Trump, will be the President of the United States at those sporting events. I think Democrats should have run on that. Vote Harris, because he's going to be representing us at these major sports tournaments, and we know he's going to milk the shit out of them.
Well, but here's the other thing that people aren't anticipating and should think about. It's not just about, these are on American soil, but I think we need to very much be thinking about how other countries are receiving America right now. Like, I think tonight, USA plays Canada in hockey. The Canadians booed the American national anthem. And with good reason, because of Trump calling them the 51st state, the jabs he's taken at Justin Trudeau, the jabs he's taken at the country as a whole. They're not messing with us. And so this has created, there was already always going to be animosity and a rivalry between the US and Canada when it comes to hockey, right? That's just understood. But now it's even amped up a level. And especially because you have, the USA coach saying that they would love for President Trump to come and support them in person. And just think about what the things that JD Vance is saying about Germany. Think about what we're saying about other countries. What do we expect that reception to be like when it comes to the Olympics? Because we've seen this happen before where America tries to sort of sweep its, ugliness under the rug by trotting out athletes and touting our supremacy when it comes to sports. And I think this is going to be a very contentious world stage because of how this administration continually disrespects other countries.
At least there won't be any American supremacy at the FIFA World Cup, for sure.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about that.
It's not women's soccer.
Right. And the men's one, we don't have to worry about that.
Let's take some questions from the audience, comments, criticisms, no speeches, please, to get some feedback on anything you've heard tonight, anything you want to contribute or ask me or Jemele. Microphone's right there. Who's going to be the brave person who wants to go up first? Gentlemen, yes.
Well, it might not be sports related, but we are really in a particular period of time, and you think about your kids, what we're experiencing. This has got to have ramifications for generations. And what's your thought about that?
Whew. So especially with now the emphasis on, sort of making education seem elite. Right, like it's a form of elitism. Like all of the down talking of going to college and the targeting of colleges and universities. We've seen what happened with Doge and what they're doing to institutions who research. And some of our brightest minds are at these institutions that are trying to propel America forward. And so my worry that it's not just it's what's the type of society that like your kids are going to live in and like everybody's kids are going to live in. It's going to be, frankly, one that doesn't think that expertise is valuable, that doesn't maybe value education in the same way, especially as there is an all-out assault and attack on public schools. So we're moving into a very dark period where this level of where enlightenment and education and critical thinking is going to probably be at an all-time low. We already see that in our political sphere. So I think it's going to probably get even worse.
In fact, they're encouraging the kind of anti-intellectual, anti-expertise, and encouraging of conspiracy theories and nonsense, and believing any misinformation you come across. It is very dangerous. One thing I've noticed in the last few weeks is the amount of damage they've been able to do in such a short space of time that will have generational consequences. It already is in places like Myanmar and Zambia and places where USAID was just cut off overnight, right? That's going to have generational impact. You can't just turn that back on. And I think they've realized how much damage they can do in a short space of time, which means that they know that even if they lose the midterms and Democrats take back Congress, big if, even if they lose the presidency in 2028 and Trump is joking about running for a third time, they know that it won't be undone. Right?
No.
I have no confidence in the Democratic Party to come back in and go, all right, we're going to restore all the things that these people screwed up. No, that'll be the new baseline of normal.
Correct.
Shittier public services, more reactionary attitudes towards minorities and race. All of that stuff, they're going to enshrine. They've shown that in a few weeks. 4 years of this shit? I don't know where I'll be.
What was it? They said that it took Hitler 53 days to destroy.
It was a great piece in the Atlantic.
Yeah, in the Atlantic.
Yes, and
correct.
these guys are moving fast and breaking stuff, right?
Yes.
That's what they're doing. Who wants to ask something else? Yes.
I was curious just about the power of refusal in this political moment, how you conceive of that. Like we think of the artists that canceled their appearances at the Kennedy Center. Is there concern that without those appearances, you're just going to get artists that maybe support Trump or a different perspective. Now at the Kennedy Center, it changes that legacy. I'm curious about how you conceive of refusal.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this, but is it a good idea to withdraw?
I mean, I'm thinking about it in the context of Twitter every day.
Yeah.
Do I want to leave that space and cede it to fascists?
Correct.
But also, it's horrible being on there. But yeah, in the grander scheme of things, we saw the first time you mentioned sports teams didn't show up, and that did do damage to him. But I think now, as you implied, there are other people to fill that gap. I think they've created their own kind of infrastructure to are we going to have a Kennedy Center by the end of this term? Is it going to be the Trump Center?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know there's a lot of people who are very, who are very critical of the fact that comparing Trump to Hitler, right? It's not about comparing them one-to-one. What it is about is seeing how very easily the Nazi regime was able to get into power, totally destabilize the entire country. And of that, there is a huge blueprint that he is literally following to the letter. And one of the things that they did was they took over entertainment and they took over the arts. And they were able through that to get a certain amount of propaganda. That's why I said, is withdrawing actually the right thing?
Depends what you define as withdrawal. I do think people should avoid anything that normalizes, right? I know people get really, normalized. Yeah, this shit is abnormal. The more you allow it to become normal, and to go back to the earlier question about generational damage, my worry is, and maybe this is very naive and utopian, it's the United States of America has made a lot of progress in recent decades on multiple fronts, right? It's far from perfect, still massive issues of institutional racism and other things. But we're not where we were in the 50s and 60s. And when people say make America great again, the obvious question is, when was it great? Which year? Tell me the year you want to go back to.
And great for whom?
And who? But my worry is now what you've done is you've normalized certain behaviors, rhetoric, the words people are using. That's hard to put back in the bottle. We spent a lot of time trying to get people to stop being misogynistic, racist, etc., bigoted in public, having basic morals, etiquettes. That's all being undone, right, by the kind of crude crassness of the guy at the top. He's allowed every racist to come out from under the rock and just be proud of their racism. And I think that anything that normalizes that, I think we have to, personally, I don't want to be part of that. And that's why, and again, I mentioned earlier, I think all the media outlets should stick together. If they have any brains, they would stick together for self-preservation and to take a stand for what is normal. But second time round, I think he is defining a lot more of the agenda. And it depends how big enough the celebrities are, for example, who are taking the stand. Obviously, Hollywood, is full of a lot of liberal people, but the industry itself, to go back to the point, is corporate controlled by a lot of people who make a lot of money out of Trump tax cuts and the rest. But it's a tricky one. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. And I don't like judging people from afar if I don't have to, when people are making tricky decisions about representation and boycott.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And but in this moment, I am kind of caught between both of them. It's like, okay, is it better to stay in and resist and be a presence and remind them of what's happening, or is it better to just sort of withdraw your talent for your own sort of safety and, frankly, for your own mental health? So
mental health is
I could see it in both directions.
All right, let's take a couple more.
You guys both come out of strong tradition of media and fact-based media. People in this room are talking about disrupting those systems and the internet itself. And I'm just wondering, and it's dominated by the far right at this point, by far and away. How do we pull that back? We just keep talking about the media this, the media that, but really the definitions are out the window. And I'm just wondering how, from your platforms, you capture some of that back.
Well, one, I mean, I think, part of the reason the Democrats are in this position is that they lost the information war and they lost it not with this election. They actually lost it a long time ago, and they just didn't strangely realize this. And so what I would say is that instead of this drift to the middle, dig down harder into the progressiveness, dig down harder into it, because frankly, that is the blueprint. It's like, stop worrying. There's a phrase that a producer, we used to talk about this all the time, is that Democrats worry too much about the people hating outside the club. That's their whole problem, right? They worrying about everybody hating from the general admission line. No, worry about making the VIP the most popping spot and make everybody who hating outside the club wish they were in VIP. So that needs to be sort of the mentality, right? So when they looking, they they got bottle service, they got 1942, yes. And you want to be in on this party or no? Oh no, stay your hating ass outside the club. So what I would say is that they need to start pulling some levers in media, be it creating their own, because I did see this as an encouraging sign. I think the Midas Touch podcast overtook Joe Rogan as being the #1 most listened to podcast. That is a good sign. So you need to dig in harder on things like that and creating your own media spaces that are counter narratives to what we're seeing. Again, stop worrying about the people that ain't fucking with you anyway. Right? Worry about the people that are, because you can make them aggressively stand up in this moment because they feel like somebody has their back.
I can't wait for your next Atlantic piece, the Democratic Party outside the club. I've got the headlines ready to go. Jeffrey Goldberg, get that commissioned quickly.
It should be Democrats, semicolon. Stop worrying about people hating outside the club.
There you go. We're all waiting for that piece. We're out of time, but I would just say in response to that last question, unfortunately, we don't have any time for more questions. But to that question, I would just say, look, when it comes to disrupting, I got to do the plug and say, I literally set up a media company to try and take some space away from the right-wingers who are owning a lot of the online media space. Thank you very much. When I left MSNBC, one of the reasons I set up Zeteo was because I saw the Tucker Carlsons and the Megyn Kellys and the Ben Shapiros. I'm like, where is the progressive equivalence? Where are people on the left doing this? Can a subscription-based model work on the left? And a year in, yes, it can. Thank you all. But what I would say is we do need more people doing that, right? Being able to take a risk, do independent journalism, and then have people who sit and complain online actually put their money where their mouth is and support independent journalism, support independent podcasts, so that we can build an infrastructure that does, unfortunately, does take on, unfortunately, the far right, which has been doing this much longer, both on YouTube and in the podcast space and in the all of those different spaces. But it's not going to happen unless we all actually support each other.
1,000%.
You just plug the Midas Touch project. You don't work for them, you don't get paid for them, but we're plugging other people who are trying to do. The problem we have on the left and the liberal left is we love a good circular firing squad, right? Let's be honest, we're so busy taking each other out. Meanwhile, Tucker and Joe Rogan are at the inauguration of the President of the United States. So on that note, I would like you all to go and subscribe to Zeteo. Obviously, I'm a small businessman, I have to say that. Go subscribe to Zeteo at zeteo.com. Like and share this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to the On Air Fest for hosting us here in lovely Brooklyn. Lovely to be here. I'm Mehdi Hassan.
I'm Jemele Hill. And make sure you support Politics as well, another iHeart original podcast. Subscribe, download, all of the things.
100%.
We need to reward the people that we feel like are approaching this the right way and reward them to a level to where this can stay supported and funded.
And we were not kidding. Thank you. Thanks so much.
We're Not Kidding is a Zeteo production. I'm your host, Mehdi Hassan, and today's co-host was Jemele Hill. Our executive producer is Kieran Alvey. Our senior producer and editor is Frank Capello. Our music was composed by Andy Clawson. Our design is by Alicia Taytone. Our mix engineer is Valentino Rivera. And the title card animation is by Ehsan Mezgali. Special thanks to Stephen Wenzel for help with research.